Ozawa's plan to lure Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away from Leyte Gulf had succeeded. Kurita's formidable fleet was charging towards the seemingly undefended armada of supply and amphibious ships anchored off the invasion beaches. What followed was one of history's most extraordinary naval battles, a David-versus-Goliath clash in which outgunned American destroyers dared to charge headlong into the jaws of destruction. This is the story of the Battle of Samar, where a few hours of raw courage, confusion, and a critical series of mistakes changed the course of the Pacific War. On October 25th, as dawn broke over the U.S. beaches on Leyte Gulf, everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan. The Southern force had been virtually destroyed, and what remained was being pursued by the 7th Fleet Shore Bombardment Force, which consisted of 6 old battleships and 8 cruisers. Kurita's central force had been so severely damaged that it had to withdraw. In case they reversed course, Halsey planned to block the San Bernardino Strait with his formidable fleet of modern battleships and cruisers, while he took his carrier fleet north to destroy Ozawa's northern force. The only combat units remaining in Leyte were 3 escort carrier task groups known as Taffy 1, 2, and 3. 16 Jeep carriers, as they were known by their crews, were divided among the 3 task groups. Because they were constructed quickly and cheaply from the hulls of converted Liberty transport ships, U.S. escort carriers lacked armor and were slow. Due to limited space, only 28 aircraft could be accommodated in 2 squadrons. Typically 14 Avenger bombers for ground support and anti-submarine duty, and 14 Wildcat fighters for local air superiority. Rear Admiral Sprague commanded Taffy 3, the northernmost escort carrier task group, when one of his pilots on anti-submarine patrol informed him that he had spotted a large enemy surface fleet of 4 battleships, supported by cruisers and destroyers, approaching from 20 miles away. Sprague told the pilot that he had spotted Halsey's fast battleship group guarding the San Bernardino Strait. "The ships have pagoda masts, rising sun flags, and are firing on me," the pilot retorted. In reality, Halsey was so convinced Kurita was fleeing the battle that he changed his mind and pursued Ozawa's decoy carriers with his entire fleet, leaving the strait undefended. Well aware of his predicament, Sprague directed all carriers to start launching aircraft for attacks against Kurita's force and ordered a course change towards a nearby rain squall. The carriers and their escorts produced as much smoke as possible to conceal Taffy 3 from Japanese spotters. When lookouts on Yamato spotted the U.S. carriers, Kurita was as surprised as Sprague by the encounter and mistook them for fleet carriers, assuming he had part of Halsey's 3rd Fleet under observation. Straight away, Kurita made the first of many mistakes when he ordered a general attack, allowing each group to attack independently rather than coordinating a concerted effort. Kurita soon had to deal with the consequence of his general attack order when his battleship's line of fire was crossed by his 10th Destroyer Division in their rush to close with the American carriers. Kurita directed his destroyers to fall in behind the battleships, thereby negating the only advantage of his general attack order, which was to close the distance as quickly as possible. 3 fleet destroyers and 4 smaller escort destroyers had been deployed to protect the escort carriers. The 3 Fletcher-class destroyers were equipped with 10 21-inch torpedoes and 5 single-mounted 5-inch guns, whereas the smaller escorts, which were built for anti-submarine duty, were slower and only had 3 torpedoes and 2 guns. Within half an hour of spotting the U.S. ships, Kurita's lead ships had closed to less than 10 miles and began to register damaging near misses on one of the escort carriers. Without consulting his commanders, Captain Evans of the destroyer, Johnston made a U-turn and, while still making smoke and zigzagging, accelerated at maximum speed towards the Japanese with all guns blazing. He fired her full complement of 10 torpedoes as he got within 10,000 yards of the lead Japanese ship, the heavy cruiser Kumano. 1 torpedo hit, blowing the bow off Kumano. The heavy cruiser Suzuya was damaged by air attack after stopping to assist Kumano, forcing both to withdraw to port. Admiral Sprague directed the remaining 2 fleet destroyers, Hull and Heermann, to follow Johnston's lead and attack the Japanese fleet. Because of their slowness, U.S. torpedoes were easily countered by conducting evasive maneuvers, However, the evasive action slowed the Japanese warship's advance while also causing confusion within the fleet. After taking over 40 hits, some as large as 16-inch caliber, Hull became the first ship in Taffy 3 to sink. After being struck multiple times, Johnston's speed was cut in half. Despite being targeted by multiple Japanese warships, Heermann had not yet been struck by enemy gunfire. When both ships had fired all of their torpedoes, they returned to the carriers to continue laying smoke. The Japanese fired armor-piercing shells that punched the unarmored destroyers full of holes, but did not explode as they passed through them. The number of U.S. casualties would have been significantly higher if the Japanese had used high-explosive shells. An hour into the conflict, Sprague directed his destroyer escorts to begin making torpedo runs on Kurita's warships. Even though none of the torpedoes struck, the Japanese fleet became disorganized as they maneuvered violently to avoid being hit. No one on either side could see clearly what was going on, as the rain and smoke from Taffy 3's ships combined to reduce visibility to less than 10 miles. At 8:10, the escort carrier Gambier Bay was hit for the first time, causing the hangars and flight deck to catch fire. When she was holed below the waterline, flooding the port engine room, she slowed to 11 knots and was constantly hit from then on. The escort carrier Kalinin Bay also came under heavy enemy fire as the Japanese ships closed in, hitting her 15 times. To draw fire away from the escort carriers, at 0834, the destroyers were ordered to attack the heavy cruisers bearing down on the carriers. Despite being severely damaged, Johnston joined Heermann in charging forward, all guns blazing. Without orders, the escort destroyer Roberts joined them in attacking the nearest enemy ship, Chikuma. Despite overwhelming odds and having exhausted all of their torpedoes, they engaged the enemy cruisers, supported by battleships, in a gunfight. After taking a number of damaging hits, Roberts was finished off at around 9 a.m. by two 14-inch shells fired by the battleship Congo. After exchanging fire with 4 cruisers and numerous destroyers, the Johnston was left dead in the water, and at 0945, Captain Evans issued the order to abandon ship. Evans, of a Native American ancestry, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his critical role in the victory off Samar. All morning, Taffy 3 aircraft had continuously attacked Kurita's force with high explosive bombs and torpedoes until they ran out. They then used depth charges and rockets, while Wildcat fighters strafed the enemy decks with 50 cal machine guns. By now, the constant air and destroyer attacks had already sunk or crippled the heavy cruisers Chokai, Kumano, and Chikuma, strengthening Kurita's suspicion that he was engaging part of Halsey's Third Fleet. Looking out from the bridge of his flagship, the Yamato, Kurita realized he had lost tactical control after losing contact with most of his task force. Exhausted from sleep deprivation and the after effects of spending hours in freezing water just hours before, Kurita had no reliable information to make a decision on. He could hear constant enemy pleas for assistance in plain language transmissions, leading him to believe that powerful American surface units were on their way to reinforce the ships he was attacking. At 9:25, Kurita decided to end the engagement by ordering, "Rendezvous, my position." His intention was to regroup his scattered warships and take stock of damage before resuming course toward Leyte Gulf. 20 minutes later, however, the admiral received a report that caused him to reconsider. A large enemy task force had been spotted to his north, near the San Bernardino Straits. Kurita remained in the vicinity of the morning's battle, unsure of his decision. He eventually decided to head north in search of the enemy task force, which turned out to be a false alarm. He decided to cut his losses and continue through the San Bernardino Strait as he returned to base. Kurita's biggest mistake was not heading for the invasion beaches after reassembling his scattered warships. The devastation his powerful force would have inflicted on the supply and support ships tightly packed off the coast would have been unimaginable, potentially delaying the U.S. timeline by months, if not years. By retreating, he undoubtedly saved his force from eventual destruction, which in normal circumstances would have meant they could fight another day. However, by this point in the war, Japan had exhausted its fuel reserves and was incapable of mounting another major operation. The majority of the ships Kurita returned to port were relegated to serving as stationary anti-aircraft batteries until they were destroyed in Cure Harbor 2 months before the Pacific War ended.
Subscribe and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next video.